As I said earlier, my name's Gary O'Rourke. I've never been involved in a political campaign in my life before, ever. I'm not a member of a political party, and I'm definitely not a member of the SNP. So, as I say, I'm a local. About a year ago, I got fed up hearing things on the TV and not knowing the answers, and I started doing some research. If the research that I did had taken me in another direction, I wouldn't be here tonight speaking as a member of the Yes campaign. I would be sitting down on the floor and would be asking questions. But the research I did encouraged me that there's only one way to go to actually make a difference in the lives of the people of Scotland. So here I am, and this is what I've got to say. At the risk of being melodramatic, I consider myself to be one of Thatcher's children. And I think that a lot of people in the hall would consider themselves in a similar vein. I grew up at a time when words like the winter of discontent was a common phrase, and there was a whole load of things going wrong in Britain in the 1970s. I remember power cuts, people trying to cook their dinners on coal fires and all sorts of nonsense and 3-day weeks and stuff like that. And people thought that was bad enough. Well, I personally think what came after was worse. All through the Thatcher time in power, I was a teenager, and my generation grew up, and I think we were a kind of lost generation in a way, that we didn't get the opportunities to get the jobs and the careers that we could have done. So I spent a lot of my time hoping that Labour would come to the rescue, and I'm not going to bash the Labour Party tonight, because I've got a lot of hope for the future of the Labour Party in Scotland. So don't get me wrong when I start going down this route. The big loss for me was John Smith. I remember when John Smith died, I felt like my uncle had died. I thought it was a great lost opportunity, because I thought he was a real decent, honest man. And in terms of politicians, they got a bad reputation, and they seem to be out for themselves, quite a lot of them. And for me, John Smith was one of the exceptions. And I know sometimes we can talk about people in saintly terms and exaggerate how good they would have been or what they might have done, but honestly feel that John Smith was a decent man. Another decent man was Robin Cook, who, if my memory serves me correctly, was one of the few who stood up and opposed the Iraq War and had the guts to resign over it. The word resignation doesn't seem to be in the political parlance anymore. Robin Cook was one of the last to do it. And then there was Donald Dewar, who to some people is the kind of father of the Scottish Parliament that we now have, the father of Holyrood. So I see these guys in glowing terms, but unfortunately, I don't think that the promise and the expectation from that generation of Labour politicians actually came through. What we did get was Tony Blair. Now, I'll confess, like a lot of you in the room, I voted for Tony Blair, and that was the last time I voted Labour. We got the Iraq War. We got a government that in many respects was very much like a Tory government, and it catered towards Middle England. We ended up with an economic crash, and I think two of the gentlemen who have spent a lot of time coming to Scotland lecturing us on how we should run our affairs were actually responsible for that. But no surprises when I say to you that those two gentlemen were Brown and Darling, and they come up here and they lecture us about what we should and shouldn't do, and they lecture us about pensions, and I personally think they've got a cheek. So, as I say, I feel that we are, in many respects, Thatcher's and Blair's children. Now, I'm just going to read you a wee list here from one of my wee props. And this is an election, piece of election material from the past. And the person wanting to be elected put the words Home Rule on their poster. They also had democratic government on their poster at a time when people were fighting for democratic rights. Now, I think we're still fighting for those democratic rights because I think we're misgoverned. Justice to Labour was one of the expressions as well. No monopoly, which today is still very relevant in terms of these big companies that monopolise energy and so on and so forth. No landlordism, which takes us into the realms of housing. And we've got another housing bubble coming thanks to London, which caused all the problems in the first place, again, if I remember correctly. Temperance reform was one of their wee hobbies. I think that's still an issue in Scotland today. Healthy homes, fair rents, an 8-hour day, and work for the unemployed. Now, I don't know if you can see my wee prop, because this is designed to work in a little hall, but it says vote for Keir Hardie. That's what it says there. Okay, now, I think this man must be turning in his grave. Now, I'm not shy about telling he's one of my heroes, but I think his party has definitely left the building in terms of what he was speaking for. I don't really care what party name you put on things. This campaign gets accused of being SNP, this SNP, that and all the rest of it. And as I say, I'll admit to you, I've voted SNP, but that's because I feel like I've got nobody else to vote for at the moment. It's constitutional change that we require. This is a constitutional debate. And if you think about modern democracy in Britain, it's 125 years. British democracy, you could argue it's further back. But for me, it's been 125 years of waiting. I'm pretty tired of waiting, and I want things to change. And if you're looking around about you for somebody to save you now, then I'm sorry, the cavalry's not coming over the horizon. You're going to have to save yourselves. We're too good at looking for leaders. We're also too good at looking for somebody to blame. It's time to grow up and deal with things ourselves. So, who's going to save us now? The question is, and the answer, we're told, is Miliband. Now, I personally think they elected the wrong Miliband, but I'll stick with the one that we've got. He made a speech this year about saving the middle classes. Now, I don't remember the last time, or any time, that Labour leaders were supposed to save the middle classes. He also talked about leading like Thatcher, and I'd quite like him to explain what that means. And if he's trying to get votes in Scotland, I think he's heading in the wrong direction there. £25 billion more cuts are coming. The austerity hasn't bitten yet the way it's going to bite. And Miliband has promised that he will honour those cuts because he's so desperate to win those votes in Middle England. So basically, austerity stays. It's too easy for us to think voting for the status quo is okay. The UK is not okay. There is no certainty. There is no certainty in voting for the status quo. It doesn't exist because there are cuts coming in England. The Barnett formula is up for grabs. The money that goes to the Scottish Parliament is there to be renegotiated. And every time a service in England is privatised, the Barnett consequentials, for example, in health, have a knock-on effect. The BMA are meeting this month and they're going to be discussing whether you pay to go and see a doctor. Now, that sounds like the 1930s to me, and I don't think that's the direction that Scotland should be going in. So this idea that the status quo is a certainty, I think, is a complete myth. So really, I think we really need some constitutional change, and I think it's time that we took that step. There have been a lot of promises about Devo Max. Now, Devo Max to me is pocket money. It's about, will I give my children so much on a Saturday? And if there's a little bit more devolution, then I might let them decide a wee bit more freely how they'll spend their pocket money. Maybe they choose between the ice rink or the pictures or something like that. So I don't think it's the way forward. I think the way forward is control of the economy, control of revenue, taxation. That's how you run an economy, and that's how you steer a country towards social justice. I'm going to bring up UKIP, because obviously I have to. And I'm just wondering how you like the sound of Nigel Farage as Deputy Prime Minister in a coalition government in 2015. Maybe I'm scaremongering. I hope I am. But again, this idea that the UK is okay is definitely not the case. I'm going to talk about child poverty. 33% child poverty in the 3 towns. That's horrendous. If you go to the east end of Glasgow, it's 60%. People, men, live longer in modern-day Iraq than they do in the east end of Glasgow. Norway has 10% child poverty. Scotland is double that, and it's set to rise. The Labour Party, I'm going to give them some credit again. They actually made inroads into that poverty. They spent 13 years doing it, and that progress has been reversed in 4 years of coalition government. We're back to square one and heading in the wrong direction. So the point I'm making there is you can vote for Labour, but you will get the Tories again. Even if they alternate between power, they come back round. Norway, I'm going to mention them again, they've got an oil fund of £450 billion. I think it's closer to 500. They managed it in 20 years. So whether you argue about 20, 30, 40 or 50 years of Scottish oil left, that's just the North Sea. There's the West Coast stuff that we're not allowed to talk about. Then you've got that as well. We could still build up an oil fund for the future because we can't burn all the oil. We've actually got too much in the world to burn. We've got too much around our coastline. UK debt is £1,300 billion. And yes, we'll take a share of that. The question is, how do you pay it? For me, the UK and what they've done with our oil money, if you excuse the analogy, it's a bit like a man going home from the pub on a Friday night. And he's spent the wages. And he's wasted them. And he tells the kids and the wife on the Saturday morning it's scrambled egg all week again. So I hope you get the point there. For me, constitutional change is needed. It's about democracy. I don't think we've ever had democracy. We see democracy as putting people in charge to lead us, and then we forget that we're the bosses, we're in charge. They don't rule us. We get rid of them if they don't do what we tell them. We cannot do that towards our London government. But I can assure you, it's only 65 miles along the road to Edinburgh, and we'll soon let them know, and we can vote them back out. That's something you can't do. I had the pleasure of meeting Jim Sillars last week. I'm not name dropping. I was in the audience and I went and did the selfie thing with him. I don't care. Right? To me, he's a man who's had a long career in Scottish politics. And I like one of his wee quotes that he does. He says that on September the 18th, you will hold the sovereignty of Scotland in your hand for a day. 7 o'clock in the morning. You will be the government of Scotland. You've never been that before. Nobody in Scottish history, none of the ordinary people have ever been in control of their country, ever in Scottish history, but you will. At 7 o'clock that morning when you're waking up. At 10 o'clock that night, Jim Sillars has already said, please don't give it back. So, we're told quite a lot about being the canny Scots. We're meant to be clever. We invented the modern era in many ways. We designed and built the 20th century. If you go back to the 18th century Enlightenment, we had the smartest people on the planet. But then we're told by loads of different experts and London leaders that we can't do this and we can't do that and we can't do this. So does canny Scots mean that we're clever? Or is it the modern day expression that you can't do anything for yourselves? Are you the only country in the world that cannot govern? There's 193 countries in the United Nations, and we're the exception, we're told. So, I'd just like to finish with a wee quote from R.B. Cunningham Graham. He's quite a famous gentleman who's one of the founders of the Scottish National Party. He says the enemies of Scottish nationalism are not the English, for they were ever a great and generous folk, quick to respond when justice calls. Our real enemies are among us. They are born without imagination. Thank you.